Somalis.
Well, that's very tough rhetoric from a guy who just quit because his fraudulent activities have been uncovered. Look, Tim Walz is a joke. His entire administration has been a joke. The idea that he's some sort of freedom fighter, he's not. He's a guy who has enabled fraud and maybe, in fact, has participated in fraud. That's what this new Assistant Attorney General position is going to find out. I don't care what Tim Walz says. I care about getting to the bottom of this fraud for the American people, and I care about enforcing the nation's immigration laws. That's what we're going to stay focused on.
So as left-wingers riot and cause a massive scene in Minneapolis, Minnesota, I don't want people to lose sight of the real reason why ICE is actually in that city to begin with. And by the way, the same exact reason that Tim Walz was forced to recently announce an early retirement. I'm not one of these people who necessarily believes that every major news story is a distraction. However, let me just say in this case, it is awfully convenient that Tim is trying to draw so much attention away from the real story here. And that is, of course, the fact that there are currently multiple federal investigations, both coming from the legislative and executive branch, into the organized fraud criminal enterprise that was being perpetrated both by Somali criminals, but also the elected Democrat Party officials in the state of Minnesota. And as we speak, as you see protests in the streets today, we've got a few major updates, both in terms of the current House investigation going into Minnesota that is once again proving this was not an issue of Tim Walz being ignorant to the whole thing. No, he was actually trying to cover up and silence whistleblowers against the fraud. This has even resulted in a criminal referral being sent over to the Department of Justice, and it only expands from there. We also got to tell you about Ilhan Omar, who apparently in a government funding vote today lost about $1 million for her district after she was still trying to fund likely government welfare fraud, despite all of the attention already being placed on this stuff, right? The boldness of that is absolutely insane, but nonetheless, let's give you these updates, guys, in today's video. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. We greatly appreciate the support. And that said, just this week, we got an official hearing out of the House of Representatives on this very subject that found and revealed, yes, that Tim Walz had blocked several investigations into high priority fraud cases. So again, we say, he has recently tried to do this pivot where he's saying, oh, no, I've actually always been serious about the fraud. We're trying to ask the state legislature to do more. Trump is wrong when he states that, we were just enabling the criminals. No, actually, it was happening exactly as we described. Take a listen.
Representative Robbins, do you have any examples of how the Walz administration blocked investigators from moving forward with high priority fraud investigations?
Yes, we do, Mr. Chairman. I've met with whistleblowers and gotten documents from them about how after the original CCAP whistleblower report came out in March and April of 2019, subsequent to that, there was an Office of Inspector General within DHS that had investigative authority to do surveillance, warrants, and seize electronics, and they were shut down. They were told they could no longer do criminal investigations. They were told they could no longer meet with the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension agents that were assigned to them without supervisor's approval. And instead, when they found one of the other members talked about how they changed the language. They went from calling it fraud to calling it overbilling. And they created an overbilling committee to all the investigative agents now couldn't do criminal investigations, and they had to flag issue overbilling, and then a committee would decide if any of that overbilling would be recouped.
Committee appointed by Walz?
No, appointed within DHS.
Oh, appointed by the own bureaucracy.
Yes. So they shut down criminal investigations. They created a committee to call it overbilling and decide if overbilling investigations would even try to recoup the money.
This is evidence that Tim Walz...
It sounds to me like Tim Walz was directly involved here.
Yeah, well, no wonder so many of their paid and professional activists are currently out in the streets, because a week ago, this was the biggest domestic news story in America, and now suddenly it's become the sideshow. That's why I want to remind everyone it is the main show. And what have I been saying for months since the beginning of this scandal? It's not just a story about Somali crime, it's also the fact that the state government clearly knew what was going on and was in on it. Here we see yet more proof of that, because after all, Tim Walz says, oh, I'm fighting the crime. No, the documented case says he was actually trying to make it easier to commit the crime through very conscious regulatory decisions. But even then, think about this for a moment. So say you are the state government, and even if you don't necessarily care about being trustworthy stewards of the taxpayers' money, it's still your treasury at the end of the day. You would think if you're them, you don't want to get defrauded, because if you're already facing a budgetary crisis, which Minnesota is, yeah, it's not a good thing for your money, and really the taxpayers' money, but you know what I mean, right? For your money to be stolen. After all, if you're running a business, whatever business you're running, or it's just your own money, or, you're giving out money to people to go do a service for you and then they just take it, wouldn't you be upset over that? Wouldn't you be offended? Wouldn't you want to get that money back because it does belong to you? Yeah, that's what you would think, right? So the only reason, frankly, you would loosen anti-fraud measures from a logical perspective is if in some way that fraud is of benefit to you. Okay, and I think it's already first and foremost well known that there is a political machine operating with the Somali community in Minnesota. Yes, they basically buy the votes by saying, hey, we'll allow you to defraud us, take all the money you want, abuse people, abuse taxpayer money, and then in return, hey, just keep voting Democrat, we stay in power. But I think it's also well established it might not just be that shallow. There's probably a lot deeper corruption going on, and we've proven, by the way, already that Minnesota AG Keith Ellison has received those very kickbacks on the campaign trail. It goes on, and I want to remind people these are not victimless crimes. Absolutely, they're having real impacts on the social services that liberals claim they want to protect and defend, which makes it, again, all the more highly strange and ironic if Tim Walz is telling the truth about this and genuinely he actually cares about the money he was cracking down on fraud, why he made moves like this. It's really mystifying.
Under Governor Tim Walz, billions of dollars intended for families in need, housing for disabled seniors, and services for children were diverted to benefit fraudsters. I am here this week to signal the U.S. Treasury's unwavering commitment to recovering stolen funds, prosecuting fraudulent criminals, preventing scandals like this from ever happening again, and investigating similar schemes state by state.
Democrats took money from our kids. Democrats took money from your kids, the kids who need it most, dumped it into fraudulent daycare facilities, and turned the other way when this abuse was reported. This has been their pattern, so this really shouldn't surprise anybody. But what's happening there is absolutely disgusting. Tim Walz can announce that he won't run again for governor, but he will still be held accountable by House Republicans. And that's exactly what we're doing this week in the House Oversight Committee.
And look, not to sound like a broken record, because I've made the same point many times, but you're seeing it once again. Isn't it funny how woke politics is such a convenient excuse to money launder and commit crime? I mean, just break down what Walz apparently did here. Well, they shut down criminal investigations and then reclassified it from fraud to overbilling. Because after all, that language is more sensitive or more inclusive, right? They're not the homeless, they're the unhoused. They're not midgets, they're little people, right? Same exact thing, but conveniently, let's actually write that down. And then, think about that on a bigger picture. So what is liberal politics all about? Social services, more government funding for stuff. Oh, that's interesting. If you increase government funding and give out more grants to nonprofits and stuff, that's way more room you can have for money laundering than if you alleged yourself to be a conservative, right? And then secondly, you don't want to look like you're targeting Somali people because that would be racist, right? They're minorities, they're brown, they're black. You can't look at them for committing crimes. Yeah, sounds woke, doesn't it? No, it doesn't sound woke. It sounds like, those are the criminals, you're in on the criminals, you're protecting the criminals. Many such cases every single time. Now, that said, apparently, according to Representative Anna Paulina Luna, she has officially sent over a criminal referral for Governor Tim Walz to the Department of Justice here today, pursuant to 18 U.S. Code 371. The charges there, obviously, as we've been trying to call out, right? Conspiracy to defraud the United States and aiding and abetting federal offenses, which he absolutely did. Now, we know how this DOJ stuff goes, okay? So I'm not going to get anyone's hopes up that, Tim Walz will actually be in prison as much as he should be. Even if they bring a case, some woke judge is going to throw it out immediately. But who knows, because there is some good news here today. VP Vance announced that the Trump administration would be appointing a new assistant attorney general to prosecuting fraud. So there's going to be basically an entire section of the DOJ now. I don't know why there wasn't before, but specifically designed to ensure taxpayer money is not being sent to criminal fraudsters. Take a listen.
If you're a young parent, struggling to afford childcare in the United States of America, there are programs that we have to make it easier for your kids to get in daycare, for your kids to get in preschool. Those programs should go to American citizens, not be defrauded by Somali immigrants and others. Make it hard for you to get the access to the resources you need. But number two, making it easier for people who shouldn't even be in this country to fleece the United States and our taxpayers to begin with. We have actually activated a major interagency task force to make it possible to get to the heart of this fraud. We have Department of Agriculture resources that are focused on SNAP fraud so that people who need food benefits can get them, but illegal aliens and other fraudsters don't. We have over 1,500 subpoenas that the Department of Justice has issued to get to the heart of the fraud ring. We've done almost 100 indictments, mostly Somali immigrants, but also a few others. And of course, we're looking in with broad investigatory authority to a number of the instances of wrongdoing that we've seen in Minneapolis. But we also want to expand this. We know that the fraud isn't just happening in Minneapolis, it's also happening in states like Ohio. It's happening in states like California. And so what we're doing in order to help coordinate this remarkable interagency effort from the Trump administration, but also to make sure that we prosecute the bad guys and do it as swiftly and efficiently as possible, is we are creating a new Assistant Attorney General position who will have nationwide jurisdiction over the issue of fraud. Now, of course, that person's efforts will start and focus primarily in Minnesota, but it is going to be a nationwide effort because, unfortunately, the American people have been defrauded in a very nationwide way.
Yeah, well, something that's certainly long overdue, and frankly, it's evil that it never existed all along from the very moment that the federal government introduced income tax. Because think about it for a moment, right? So the IRS, whenever you have to pay your taxes, the IRS has an entire network set up to make sure you are not defrauding them. Businesses of decent size have to have huge networks of accountants and independent auditors to make sure all their money and all their books are in order, because after all, the government will absolutely target you if you are defrauding them. But yet when the government defrauds us, there's no mechanism by which apparently you can hold anyone accountable for that. And they're not checking this entire time that, hey, you know, our taxpayer money, all of our books are in order and we're sending them out to legitimate places. But hey, if you have a business write-off on your 1099 that's kind of questionable, they'll drop the hammer on you. They'll penalize you. They might even throw you in jail for tax fraud. Yet when our government does that, apparently it's okay. It's disgusting. And secondly, as it pertains to this, frankly, you also have to ask the question as to how much of our prosperity and economic growth and everything as a country, our finances, right, have been stolen by the two issues of really mass immigration and fraud, although they're pretty much connected on the topic of immigration fraud, you know? You talk about the national debt, for instance, and how bankrupt America is going and how even state governments are having very similar debt problems. Sure, on the surface, for years, conservatives have argued, oh, the bureaucracies are too big, things are too bloated. That's absolutely true. But you also have to question how much of it is just being sent to completely fake places, right? I mean, liberals for years have made these arguments that, oh, well, you know, if the government kind of puts more stimulus money in the economy, that'll generate economic growth in return. And sure, already that's a little bit flawed, right? The whole printing money or throwing money into the economy argument, because it's unnatural growth. But even then, okay, you want to talk about why maybe the COVID stimulus didn't seem to actually stimulate the economy. How much of that money was just simply stolen, and that's why you never saw it in the economy? I mean, these are serious questions we ought to be asking. But before we get too much into that, I would like to further note that even the battle against new fraud, despite all of the public attention towards it, is not over. Because today, if you did not know, the House of Representatives passed a brand new government funding bill, and initially in it, included, I kid you not, $1 million of funding for this place in Minnesota called Community Justice Services that claimed it was earmarked for Generation Hope Minnesota and its Justice Empowerment Initiative. Already that sounds like fraud. We're giving $1 million to social justice. What is up with this? Of course, this funding, as you could expect, was supported by Representative Ilhan Omar and Senator Amy Klobuchar. Yeah, but so there's, in other words, despite all of the attention, they still think they can get away with this. Secondly, Generation Hope Minnesota is described as a Somali-run nonprofit. Oh, because we haven't seen a bunch of problems with those as of late. But yeah, a Somali-run nonprofit focused on addiction recovery services. But maybe you'll think, oh, maybe this is the one Somali-run nonprofit that's actually legitimate. No, however, when the address listed in the earmark justification is searched online, it appears to match the location of a Somali restaurant rather than a treatment or recovery facility. Very interesting. Now, the good news is that in the end, due to obviously all the attention on this fraud issue, this was ultimately taken out of the government funding bill. In other words, Ilhan Omar lost one of her likely $1 million fraud scams. But I'd also like to point out how difficult this was. Initially, the House GOP, I kid you not, was going to just pass this government funding bill with that included anyway, and it took a rebellion by conservative members of the House basically saying, we won't vote for this if it's included in the funding bill in order to strip that out, which to me raises a lot of questions about, frankly, the unseriousness and the disgracefulness of Republican congressional leadership. Because first of all, why was it in there to begin with? And if you want to say, oh, well, we weren't really paying attention because Ilhan Omar just kind of put the thing she wanted in the bill, okay. If the House is controlled by Republicans, why is Ilhan Omar getting a say to begin with, right? I mean, after all you need is a simple majority to pass government funding. What is the point of that? At least in the House, right? So why are you giving her the leverage, first of all, to even control your spending? This is the party that also claims, oh, we're here to be fiscally conservative. Okay, if you're going to be fiscally conservative, maybe it seems like check mark number one, don't let the Democrats trying to commit fraud continue to commit fraud, right? This shouldn't have to have been something that went down to a last minute fight or whatever. It should have never been in there to begin with, and we shouldn't be like allowing Democrats to control spending when we're in control of the government. But anyways, good news there. Ultimately, it was strucken out, but worth noting, yeah, Ilhan Omar apparently still thinks she can get away with it. And let me just say, as it pertains to her, as you could expect, right, considering we've already exposed a Democrat Somali-backed fraud machine operating in Minnesota, it looks like the rabbit hole might run a little bit deeper with her as well. Take a listen.
Well, now investigators are tracking the web of fraud to other Minnesota Democrats, such as Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. Many of the suspects linked to the scheme live in her district, including a restaurant owner who hosted events for her. He has since been convicted of stealing $12 million in COVID funds.
Yeah, and as the rabbit hole gets deeper and deeper, I think at a certain point, you really have to start questioning a lot of the past statements of Minnesota Democrats in particular. We've already raised the point time and time again how, well, Tim Walz out of nowhere decided that DOJ was going to be his big issue, right? He was going to constantly be rallying and doing all these town halls against it, which was what, fundamentally a project to get waste, fraud, and abuse out of the federal government. And then you turn around and realize, maybe there was a reason he was so extraordinarily passionate about that. But the same is true of Ilhan Omar. I mean, we've recently discussed how the fraud network is so deep, even members of the Somali government, yes, over in Somalia, are in on it. It's worth noting, I would argue Somali fraud is not just about the refugees in America who have defrauded the government through welfare. Let's not also forget about the country of Somalia itself, which has received something about $40 billion in foreign aid over the past several decades, has done essentially nothing with it. And then you kind of put two and two together. You realize, by the way, even members of the Somali government, like the UN ambassador, have been caught in the United States engaging in welfare fraud. And maybe this all runs very deep. But all of that said, here's the point I want to raise about it. What was one of Ilhan Omar's big issues herself in the past year or so was, of course, the shutdown of USAID, right? We talked a lot about that last year. And toward the end of last year and into this year, we're talking a lot about domestic welfare fraud. But I don't want people to lose sight of the fact when you consider that rabbit hole runs over international lines, right? Thousands of dollars, millions actually, 700 million in total of cash being flown out of the United States to Somalia. All this back and forth. Former Somali government officials saying that Ilhan Omar represents the interests of Somalia and not America, blah, blah, blah. It goes on and on and on, right? That maybe, when you really think about it, the USAID story and the Minnesota fraud story are pretty closely connected here. Take a listen.
It is really, really a sad day in America. We are witnessing a constitutional crisis. We talked about Trump wanting to be a dictator on day one, and here we are. This is what the beginning of dictatorship looks like. When you gut the Constitution and you install yourself as the sole power, that is how dictators are made.
But yeah, guys, sure. I'm sure this is nothing more than a naive political ideology and not a criminal enterprise going on. Definitely, they only supported USAID because they were quote unquote liberal, right? They're globalists. That's why it's an idea. They only are against the crackdown on welfare fraud because they're just woke. They're just liberals. They're, against what ICE is doing right now in Minneapolis. They're in a big uproar over that because they're just pro-mass immigration. Is that the story? Or is it much deeper that, yes, again, all of their ideas are very convenient excuses to commit massive money laundering and crime? I don't know. You tell me. But that said, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace. They're just liberals, right? Yeah.